Professor Luciani, welcome to Muscat. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I'm really thankful for your time. This is supposed to be a casual meeting. Feel free to interrupt me.
My pleasure.
Thank you. I would like to introduce you, if you allow me. Professor Luciani is known for his contribution to the Rentier state, and he was head of Gulf Research in Geneva. He is a senior researcher to the Gulf Research in Qatar, is it?
In Jeddah.
In Jeddah. And you are also a member or working in the Science Politics, the School of Science Politics in Paris.
Yes, the Sciences Po, which is the school, the Paris School of International Affairs. I teach there.
Yes, and then your focus is in the Middle East and North Africa. You have done a lot of study and publication in the area of geopolitics, oil, and let's say a focus in the Gulf area, especially in Saudi Arabia. Anyway, welcome to Oman.
Thank you.
We are going to cover some of the points, hopefully, today in this casual interview. I have sat with you for, let's say, twice, and you were emphasizing in two main points. One of them is I see it a very valuable advice, is it's time for the Gulf country to reconsider or look into not depending on relying on the cheap labors, and introducing technology on some of the activities that can be done by the locals and giving them opportunity. The other important things which is coming from, let's say, non-Arab researcher, telling the Gulf countries that they should cooperate and have regional cooperation when it comes or it serves their initiative or the repetitive, let's say, trial on the economic diversification. There is, let's say, misunderstanding or not a clear understanding between economic diversification and financial diversification. Today, and I guess both of us agree that we are living in unusual circumstances. We are 5 years or 6 years after the Arab Spring.
Yes.
The Gulf countries facing the similar, let's say, similar challenges like, the drop in oil price, the demographic change, more than half of its population youth demanding jobs. And then we try to cover the recent let's say, events of the geopolitics and the role of Iran in the Middle East, the role of Oman within the Gulf countries, and its relationship with the Islamic Republic of Iran. So I would give you free start.
Thank you. You have presented me with a very challenging set of questions.
I see.
Let us start from the first one, which is dependency on expatriate labor and the need to reform labor market in the Gulf countries. I think this is now absolutely necessary and unavoidable and cannot be deferred any longer. It is clear that initially when at the onset of the oil boom, when the oil price started rising in the 1970s and the transformation of the Gulf began to take place, it was necessary to be able to experience accelerated growth. It was necessary to rely on expatriate labor. Otherwise, the mechanism of the so-called Dutch disease would have prevented any development and would have created excessive inflation and increase in prices in the Gulf. So people were allowed to come in, were even actively sought, and this has allowed the completion of much of the infrastructure of the construction and of the also new administration, new agencies, new institutions. However, at some point you need to start protecting your own labor force. Yes. and finding jobs for your own labor force. A situation in which there is basically almost no limit to reliance on expatriate labor, especially expatriate labor from countries where wages are very low, in especially countries in South Asia, for example, where wages are extremely low, and these people are willing to come to the Gulf and work for wages that are sufficient for them and to satisfy not only their needs, but the needs of the families that they have at home, but would not be sufficient to satisfy the needs and the living standard of nationals. And therefore, they create competition for nationals in all the workplaces. And in the end, you have the situation that we know very well, whereby the nationals, especially the young nationals, remain unemployed. They cannot find a job.
Yeah, but what's the harm in having cheap laborers in the construction activities, let's say? I mean, why would a wealthy citizens or citizens who's living in a wealthy country would go for the low-level job and not in the middle-level job?
Well, because basically this distinction between low level and middle level, jobs are not necessarily what they are. Yeah. There are processes of change, and when the wages increase, companies are encouraged to introduce mechanization, to introduce machines, to introduce new technology. They increase the productivity of the workers in this way, which allows them to pay higher wages, but also changes the nature of the job itself. It's no longer a non-qualified job. It becomes a job where you need to have skills for operating the machines or the production process. So what we see is a constant improvement in the quality of jobs, of most jobs, with very few exceptions, which is due to the introduction of more advanced technology and improvement in productivity. If you maintain an abundant supply of labor at very low wages, the companies have no interest, no incentive to invest and improve the quality of jobs. So yes. It becomes a disincentive. And of course, this is not true everywhere. There remain jobs that many people would not like to perform. And we have this phenomenon in all countries, and this is always an opportunity for people from other countries to come and
so
offer.
If I'm getting this right, you are saying that reduce the dependency on the cheap laborers, try to give those companies an incentives to introduce technologies in some activities, so those kind of jobs and it should be attractive
yes, exactly.
to the locals.
If through the through the use of machine you can substitute 10 unskilled positions with one skilled position, that position will be able to pay a much better wage. It will be a much more interesting position. And generally speaking, it will be able to attract the local, the national workforce. This is what needs to be done, and there are many positions that are today occupied or functions that are performed by unskilled expatriates, which could be performed by a reduced number of more skilled nationals.
If you ask me, I wouldn't see really a big issue or an issue that can't be solved when it comes to unemployment in the Gulf region, because those countries produce jobs for non-locals, which is to me it's a strange situation, and I think by training their locals and giving them the right market skills, it shouldn't be a difficult situation for them to have jobs.
Surely the situation clearly is not one of lack of jobs in absolute terms.
Yes.
There are plenty of jobs, except that those jobs are taken by non-skilled expatriates. I insist on the non-skilled because, of course, there are also expatriates that perform skilled functions or professional functions, and those are necessary as well. The point is, however, that there is excessive reliance on unskilled workers, and this must be cured, must be addressed, and the only way to address it is to impose higher cost for employing unskilled workers. And this can be done in several ways, but the best solution is to progressively increase the wages that are paid.
To give a good example, we are being today photographed by young Omanis who were ready in 2 hours.
Absolutely, we have an entirely national skill, entirely national team,
and they're very
crew here, and I think that's very refreshing. But I am sure that there are many other functions and professions that can be performed by nationals, which are instead performed by expatriates. So, I mean, there is nothing new about this. You know, talk about Omanization or Emiratization, Saudization, wherever you are, you know. Has been around for a long time, except that the matter has not been pursued, I believe, with sufficient determination. You know, there is always fear that you will lose competitiveness if you allow wages to increase.
To me, those local programs, either they are Omanization or Saudization or whatever you call them, to me, they should be a human resource development strategy instead of employment, because the aim should be much more, I would say, deep than only creating jobs. There's supposed to be creation of pool of talents for the country. It is not just a matter of putting percentage here and there and maybe trying to impose those percentage on foreign companies without actually, you know, qualifying those nationals with the right skills and to make them really competitive when it comes to those high-skilled jobs.
That is perfectly correct. You need to engage in a process of training, of education and training, but, you know, I think that a lot of that has been done in all of the Gulf countries.
In oil sector, in the banking sector, we have it. They were good examples.
I think there are multiple examples, and I think there have been multiple efforts, including to train the workforce for jobs in industry and in other areas where today it's almost entirely expatriates that work. The two processes must go in parallel. I don't personally very much believe in setting percentages, I mean, because that only leads to cheating of various forms and potential for corruption, and you have to be careful about this.
Yes.
I believe that the way of achieving this objective is by way of progressively increasing wages, introducing minimum wage, introducing minimum conditions for work. It's not just the wage, it's also the rest of the conditions, working conditions that are important. And you must protect the rights of expatriate workers in such a way that it becomes less attractive to employ expatriates relative to employing nationals.
I think it's time to bring you back to your, I would say, preferred subject, the geopolitical events, and perhaps we can provide some reading of what is happening in the region and the role Oman has played within, let's say, the nuclear agreement with the state and with Iran. I guess both of us agree on the importance of having stability and political stability in order to have development. And those Gulf countries have enjoyed more than 40 years of political stability, and that should be built on, I would say, into an economic growth.
Yes, I think we have had a period of high oil prices from 2004, more or less, to 2014. And in this period, the situation in the region has deteriorated very seriously. You know, there has been a lot of instability in regional relations. We have had instability in many countries. We, at the moment, have a civil war raging in at least 4 countries in the region, which is Iraq,
very sadly.
Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Libya. So everybody, other countries that are not directly involved are nevertheless very profoundly involved in various ways. So the level of tension in the region has risen dramatically. And this, of course, is something that reflects very negatively on economic progress, especially especially the development of economic ties within the region. What we see today is that all countries in the region are pursuing a development strategy which is based on globalization, on global industries. Okay, oil, of course, which is fine, and then other industries that are geared towards the global market, such as petrochemicals, aluminum, and other things of this kind.
Number of refineries here.
But there is a total lack of, or almost total lack, with very few exceptions, of regional industry, of activities that would not export to distant markets, but export to nearby markets, and export and import. There is excessive global orientation and no regional orientation. Even within the GCC, the progress of bilateral trade, of horizontal trade within the GCC has not been satisfactory. There has been talk repeatedly of a customs union. This customs union still is not quite there, and so there are limitations to trade. And I believe that the future of the region can only evolve positively if such tensions are overcome, and if there is an acceptance, a mutual acceptance of all the countries in the region, and a policy of confrontation is not helping. Oman has been playing a very important role of go-between or mediator in between the GCC and Iran, which of course is one of the fundamental cleavages today in the region. It is a difficult role because, in part, other countries are not willing to consider this policy. They remain very much attached to the confrontational attitude.
Yes.
And also, domestic politics in Iran are complex, and so you may be discussing with one government and then the situation may change. So it is a difficult path, but it is the only one that can lead to economic progress for everybody.
It might be, or it might, the time or the situation today might have a positive, let's say, impact, like the scenario of the oil price, the decline of the oil price that might remain for quite a long time, and the economic condition might, let's say, bring them back to the table and think in a different way that the regional cooperation is the key for the progress, and not only building a petrochemicals complex here and there because you are serving the international market, and gaining the trust of the locals or the population in the cooperation of those countries.
Well, historically, I believe I have said sometimes that the price of oil has long cycles, cycles of about 15 years.
Yes.
If you look at it, we had a period of high oil prices in between 1970 and 1985. This was a period when prices first increased rapidly, then declined, but it's only in 1985 that they declined very seriously. Then we have had a long period of low prices, roughly between 1985 and 2000. If you remember, in 1999 the prices were extremely low. Then we have had a new period of relatively high prices from approximately 2000 to approximately 2015. Now we are again in a period of low prices, I believe. Whether, I don't know that this will last 15 years, maybe not. I don't know that it may last much longer, because at the moment there is a strong sentiment about environmental issues and the need to decarbonize energy supply.
Yes.
And so some people believe that the demand for oil will peak and decline rapidly.
Yes.
And if that's the case, because the supply of oil is abundant, there will be no reasons for prices to increase substantially again. But, clearly, the first period of abundant oil prices was a period when the process of transformation of the Gulf economies was initiated. In the second period of low prices, a lot already of thinking and policies went into promoting the private sector, into thinking about how to transform the economies. The recent period of high prices has, in a sense, created a moment of complacency, that has, not immediately, because, initially the Gulf states were quite prudent in increasing expenditure.
Yes.
But later, they could not resist to the pressure of, using the money that was coming in. And the problem really is that as you make progress along the process of diversification, you need to invent new formulas, new ways of utilizing the oil revenue and making sure that it is geared and effectively geared towards diversification and development. And this is a difficult task, and in many cases the governments fell back on old tools that are not really...
Why is that happening? Why? Because the increase in oil price is giving them relief all the time. But I see personally that the increase in oil price, if it is going to happen anyway, it's going only to pay the bills. The operational costs and the current expenditure of the government, it's not going to have economic growth, which is eventually going to lead to job creation.
The question that you're raising really needs some discussion. In essence, you know, when the state receives the oil revenue, it needs to spend it in order for the economy or the people.
By the way, I am not in favor of the says that whatever they say that oil is a curse, is not a blessing. I see it's a blessing.
No.
It depends on how you utilize it.
Exactly. You know,
yes.
It's a tool. It depends how you use it. Now, for me, I think oil money needs to be spent. I'm not very much in favor of just accumulating oil money in a sovereign wealth fund, because that simply creates a lot of financial wealth, but it does not transform the country, the economy of the country. So it needs to be spent. And initially, you know, a lot of money was spent, rightly so, first of all, in establishing a state apparatus, a bureaucracy, so hiring people for that, it was necessary.
Yes.
Then a lot of money was spent in infrastructure, you know, laying out roads to all isolated remote villages, bringing electricity to all isolated remote villages.
I
These
guess
are
that
very
was done.
essential
Yes,
steps.
that was done perfectly in the Gulf countries, I guess.
Yes, that is a major accomplishment, because when you read of countries where only 5% of the rural population has access to electricity, which is common in many countries in Africa, you know, you understand the difference. So this was necessary. But when the second wave of oil money came, more of the same was done. So you started hiring more people into the government bureaucracy, and perhaps some of those were not needed. You started building 4-lane highways instead of 2-lane highways. Now, the benefit of laying a first highway is huge. People that lived in very isolated places became connected. But when you widen that 2-lane highway to 4 or 6, even in some cases, the benefit is not proportional. You see what I mean? It is much reduced. So the effectiveness of this kind of expenditure is progressively reduced. You have to find new ways of employing the oil revenue that are more useful, more productive for the transformation of the economy.
Does this discussion leads us to the difference between financial diversification and the economic diversification? I think this is a point which needs some explanation.
Yes, of course. I mean, some people regard oil as a financial asset, okay? And you can look at it in this way. Oil in the ground is like money in the bank. The moment you produce it, you will employ this money in some fashion. From that point of view, you can say that an oil-producing country is a country that has all its wealth in a single asset, which is oil in the ground. And that is not a good financial policy. You know, from a portfolio kind of perspective, you have to diversify your investment. And so you produce the oil, you get money for it, and you use that money to invest internationally in the stock of other companies and so on and so forth. This will lead to financial diversification, okay? It will allow you to say, I'm not only the owner of a pool of oil, I am the owner of diversified financial assets. There is some merit in that, but that does not transform the economy of the country. Sure. You transform the economy of the country when you spend in education, in healthcare, in infrastructure.
Quality education, I would guess, and quality healthcare.
So, depending on the requirements of the country, depending on your stage of development, you need to meaningfully invest and spend the money domestically, okay, not just accumulate. So it all depends. There are certain countries that have limited dimension and very large oil revenue, so maybe for those countries it makes sense to accumulate an oil fund. You may have Norway, which is a country that when they started producing oil was already developed and industrialized, and so basically, you know, the only reasonable thing you could do with their oil revenue was to set it aside into a sovereign fund. But not everybody is like this.
They like to bring from time to time the Norwegian experience and to learn from it. But I guess it was only
well, the Norwegian experience is interesting in many ways, and there are things that you have to learn from the Norwegians, but basically you have to say that Norway was an industrial country even before the oil. So it was not a country that was barely based on subsistence agriculture, which is the situation that we had in the Gulf countries.
Why would we go far away to the Norwegian when I have a closer example, which is Dubai? When it comes to Dubai, I really emphasize not on copying the economic model, instead of looking in how Dubai has improved their quality, the service of quality and government performance, transforming to e-government and then to a smart government, where we have the similarities of the culture, the region, geographic, neighbors. So we have a lot of similarities which we can, study such an experience with regard to this aspect. And let me say, today is an international city where we have already infrastructure in Oman, like a Duqm, for example, where it should be, I guess, an international concept should be introduced there, and not, of course, transforming the whole country to an international. Saudi Arabia has also Jeddah, for example, which is already through the history as an international hub or trade hub, because of its location. So the concept of having multicultural society and a multi or international city yet does not exist in the Gulf except Dubai.
Yes, you are right. I think the case of Dubai is extremely interesting because it tells us that the quality of leadership makes a difference. And I sometimes ask my students, how can we explain that Dubai is Dubai and the other Emirates that were essentially at the same level as Dubai when development started after the Second World War, did not make the same progress, okay? Without mentioning anyone specifically of the other Emirates, but it is clear that there is a difference. And that has a lot to do with the vision and courage and entrepreneurship of the political leadership. The political leadership of Dubai has behaved like entrepreneurs. They are, people speak of Dubai Incorporated because it's a government that has been managed as a business.
Yes, we hear that from time to time.
already at the time of Sheikh Rashid, some very bold and courageous decisions were made. Everybody was telling Sheikh Rashid, "You are mad to put your little money into this project," and so on and so forth. And he has been partly lucky, because there is always an amount of luck when you are an entrepreneur. But partly he has been betting on the right.
But going back to history, Dubai was a trade hub, and his vision, Sheikh Rashid's vision was that Dubai is a trade hub. So what could be better than expanding or putting another port?
Yes, but other people could have done it and they didn't do it, okay?
Yes.
Originally, Dubai's creek was not the best port in the region, there were others that were better. And then it has become what it is because one after the other projects have been launched, which initially were met with disbelief or criticism. The airline is very clear. Yes. For as long as the United Arab Emirates were not an independent country, the vision of the United Kingdom, the vision that they were proposing was a unified airline, which was Gulf Air.
Yes.
You remember that.
Yes.
The Concorde used to land in Bahrain,
yes.
And there was an international airport in Sharjah,
yes.
and Sheikh Rashid went on to build an international airport, which
yes.
is actually less than 10 kilometers from the Sharjah International Airport, because he wanted his own airport. And then, Emirates Airline has been established because they wanted their own airline. All of which people said at the beginning, "Why are you doing this? This is a waste of money."
Yeah.
And it turned out that it was a very good business decision.
Yes.
So
yes.
Now, can the same work for everybody in the region? No,
of course not.
I think first of all, there is certain things that work for the first one that does it, and anybody who comes later is at a disadvantage. In any case, Dubai is a relatively small country.
Yeah.
Dubai, it's first of all, it's not even an independent country. I mean, Dubai is a small emirate. It's not Oman, it's not Saudi Arabia, it's not even Abu Dhabi. I mean, Abu Dhabi is a different size. So the same model cannot be applied to other realities.
Yes.
You need to learn from some of the experience of Dubai. Certainly,
I guess
the logistics is very important.
Yes,
so
yes.
harbors, especially for Oman, that has the advantage of having a coast on the Indian Ocean, which is therefore an open sea, while the Gulf remains a closed sea, and navigation there cannot be as free and untrammeled as it is in the Indian Ocean.
I guess Dubai, like any other experience, there are a lot to be learned, but you can't copy, of course. There are lessons to be learned. There are failure stories to be learned from. If there is really the courage to have an international cities, or the concept of international cities and multicultural society in some of the places, let's say, in Gulf. Anyway, I'm sure that you would like to convey some messages or advices to the Gulf countries
I think,
emphasize on them?
in the coming years, we shall have a period of lower prices, as I said already, and I think, therefore, it is necessary for the Gulf states to adapt to a situation of lower prices.
Yeah.
This will mean, at the same time, you have growing population, growing needs, and so the states are faced with the dilemma whether they should reduce expenditure and cut down on the role of the state. People frequently speak of privatization,
yes.
which means that the state gives up on playing certain
and taxation increasing
functions. That's one, either you reduce expenditure or you resort to taxation, or a combination of the two. And I think in the end you will have to do a combination of the two, keeping in mind that when you reduce the role of the state, this may increase inequality in society, because if you don't give free access to education, for
yes.
example, if you don't give free yes. access to health care,
yes.
This will damage the poorer strata in society, which is negative. So I think taxation will need to be introduced. This
generally, or wealthy citizens, or what exactly?
Well, there are certain taxes that are consumption taxes, and those are in effect regressive, in the sense that they end up being paid primarily by lower or middle income population rather than the very rich. So again, I think that's a problem, and it is inevitable to introduce direct taxes on income.
Yes.
This is not a problem for the Gulf countries only. As you are certainly aware, there is an active debate, a very active debate on the growing inequality in many societies, yeah. including in the United States, in Europe, and so on and so forth. And all research tells us that the growing inequality, this growing distances, and the disappearance of the middle class are to a large extent due
yes.
To the fact that taxes are being reduced. Okay.
Sure.
So direct taxation has a fundamental role in redistributing income from the wealthier, richer part of the.
But it has a price, which is comes to with it. When you introduce taxation,
We introduce taxation, and of course this will require some change in institutions, in political decision making, and so on and so forth. There are different levels of acceptance of taxation. Even in democratic countries, there has been a tendency to for the voters, for the electorate, to request or support proponents of lower taxes. So it's not that if you democratize, you automatically get an acceptance of taxation. Each country has to find its own equilibrium, its own way of approaching the issue. But certainly, when you ask the people to pay for the state, the people or their representatives will also request a say in how the money is utilized. So
True.
The idea of transparency, accountability comes almost inevitably with taxation.
Yes.
And so there is going to be, I believe, a need to reinvent the oil states and the management of the oil revenue in such a way that the oil revenue is effectively concentrated on spending for development, for the transformation. Oil revenue must be the engine of transformation of the economy and society. And the regular functioning of the state, the day-to-day functioning of the state, must be paid by increasingly by society itself. So we need to evolve towards a system that separates the strategic function, which is, you know, to think about the future, pursuing the future, transforming, and the management function, which is administrative function, which is just to take care of the day-to-day functioning of the state.
We have to come to an end of this wonderful conversation and emphasize on the separation of the strategic role of the government and the operational. You have a lecture to catch up in the cultural club today in Oman. It was wonderful to have you here, Professor Luciani. And I hope next time when you visit Oman, you would have time to see the other part of the country than Muscat.
Absolutely. It's a large country, and I've always had a desire to travel extensively in it.
Welcome.
Thank you. My pleasure.